They told them to stand still and shut up. Two officers looked at an elderly black couple, stepping out of a brand new pickup truck, and decided, before a single word was exchanged, that the truck must be stolen. They mocked them on a quiet street in broad daylight, certain nobody important was watching. They had no idea the man backing them into a corner of consequence was already on his way, a Navy commander coming home from sea, and the truck belonged to him. The late afternoon sun pressed down on Magnolia Crest Lane the way it always did in August, thick and gold and unhurried. Walter Greaves had the windows of the new Ford King Ranch cracked just enough to let in the smell of cut grass, and beside him his wife Odessa was fanning herself with the church bulletin from that morning's service. Even though the air conditioning worked just fine. "You sure you got the mirrors right, Walt?" Odessa asked, glancing at the side mirror like it had personally offended her. "This thing's bigger than our whole kitchen." "I had 38 years driving delivery trucks for the county," Walter said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I think I can manage a pickup, Des." "That's what you said about the riding mower, and you took out half of Mrs. Calloway's fence." He laughed, a warm sound that filled the cab. They were headed to the grocery store, nothing more dramatic than that. Milk, the good coffee Odessa liked, and a sheet cake for their grandson's birthday party that weekend. Their son, Commander Theo Greaves, had bought them the truck 2 months earlier, right before he shipped out for a 6-month deployment with the Navy. He'd called it a thank you, though Walter privately thought it was Theo's way of making sure his parents had something dependable now that the old Camry was finally giving up the ghost. The truck still had paper plates from the dealership in the back window, the permanent ones held up somewhere in the mail. Walter eased the truck into the turn lane near the shopping plaza, signal blinking, hands steady at 10 and 2, the way he'd been taught decades ago. He didn't notice the patrol car tucked behind the dry cleaner's sign until it pulled out behind him. No lights yet, just close. Too close. Officer Brent Calloway. No relation to the fence Walter had flattened, though the name always made Odessa snort with laughter when she heard it. Had been parked there for 40 minutes already, irritated, sweating through his collar, scrolling his phone and waiting for something, anything, to make the shift worth logging. Beside him sat Officer Dale Tibbets, a few months out of the academy, eager in the particular way of someone who hadn't yet learned what eagerness could cost other people. "There," Calloway said, sitting up. "Look at that, the truck?" Tibbets squinted. "Nice rig, new King Ranch loaded, 65-70 grand, easy." Calloway pulled out, drifting in behind the truck. "Run those plates. Temp tag, not even mounted right. Could just be new," Tibbets offered. "Could be," Calloway agreed, in a tone that made clear he didn't believe it for a second. He leaned forward, peering through his windshield at the cab ahead, the afternoon light catching the silhouettes inside. An old man, an old woman beside him. "Well, would you look at that? What? 2 senior citizens in a brand new $70,000 truck, and I'm betting my pension that's not their truck." Calloway said it the way another man might comment on the weather, flat, certain, untroubled by the weight of what he was implying. "You think a county pensioner buys that with cash?" "Maybe it's a gift, family," Tibbets said. "Or maybe somebody borrowed it from a customer's driveway." Calloway flicked on the lights. In the cab, Odessa's hand found Walter's forearm before he'd even fully registered the flashing red and blue in the mirror. "Lord," she breathed. "Walt, were you speeding?" "I wasn't going but 30, Walter said, already easing toward the shoulder, his pulse climbing despite himself. He had lived 71 years as a black man in this country, and that meant a particular kind of fluency. The fluency of knowing exactly how to hold his hands, exactly how to keep his voice low, and even exactly how small to make himself, so that nobody mistook calm for defiance. He'd taught Theo the same lessons before Theo ever learned to drive. Hands where they can see them. Don't reach for anything. Say officer, not man. Survive the conversation. Argue about the unfairness of it later, in private, where it was safe to be angry. "Keep both hands on the wheel," Odessa whispered, an old habit from a marriage that had weathered more of these stops than either of them liked to count. Calloway didn't hurry. He took his time getting out, adjusted his belt, put his sunglasses on though the sun was behind him now, and walked up with the loose, rolling gait of a man who already knew how this would end. Tibbets trailed a step behind, hand resting near his holster like he'd seen veteran officers do in training videos. Calloway rapped his knuckles against the glass, hard enough that Odessa flinched. Walter lowered the window. Afternoon, officer. Was I speeding? Calloway didn't answer. He leaned down, looked past Walter at Odessa, then back. License and registration. Yes, sir. License is in my back pocket. Registration's in the glove box. I'm going to reach for it now. Don't reach for anything. Calloway's voice sharpened. Whose truck is this? It's my son's, Walter said evenly. He's in the Navy. He bought it for us while he's deployed. A short, ugly laugh. Sure he did. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, I've got a bad hip. If you'd just let me. Out. Both of you. What did we do? Odessa's voice trembled, more from disbelief than fear, though the fear was catching up fast. Failure to comply, ma'am, is what you're doing right now, Tibbets said, opening her door before she'd even unbuckled. Walter climbed down slowly, one hand braced against the doorframe, his pressed church shirt still tucked in neat from that morning's service. He looked, to anyone with eyes, like a deacon on his way home from a long Sunday. To Calloway, he looked like an opportunity. Hands on the hood. Face the truck. This is unnecessary, Walter said, his voice rising despite the years of training that told him to keep it level. We're not. My son is a naval officer. You can check the registration. The name is Greaves. I don't want to hear about your imaginary son in the Navy, Calloway snapped, grabbing Walter's wrist and yanking it behind his back hard enough that Walter let out a small, involuntary grunt. We've had reports of high-end vehicles getting boosted out of dealership lots in 3 counties. This matches. It was a lie. There had been no such reports. Calloway was improvising the way he always did, building a justification after the fact, and daring anyone to prove otherwise. Odessa stood on the other side of the truck, purse clutched to her chest, watching her husband of 46 years get patted down on the side of a road in front of God, and the slow afternoon traffic that had begun to gather and gawk. A woman in a minivan slowed to film on her phone. A teenager on a bike stopped to stare. Odessa felt the shame climb up her neck like a fever. You have no right, she said, and her voice cracked on the word right. Ma'am, step back or you'll be joining him, Tibbets warned, though his eyes kept darting to Calloway, like he wasn't entirely sure this was the procedure he remembered from training. Calloway pulled Walter's wallet free and flipped it open. Walt to Greaves, he said the name like an accusation. Tell me, Walter, how's a man on a county pension afford a $70,000 truck? I told you. My son bought it. He's a commander in the United States Navy. Commander. Calloway tossed the wallet onto the hood, close enough to the edge that it nearly slid off. Or maybe commander is what you tell people instead of saying he's moving product. Odessa gasped audibly. How dare you? We raised that boy in church. He's given 13 years of his life to this country. Quiet. Calloway didn't even look at her. He circled the truck, peering through the windows, running a hand along the tailgate, like he was browsing a dealership lot. Tibbets, run the VIN, take your time. I want a real look at what we've got here. Walter, bent forward over the hood, felt the heat of the metal through his shirt and the deeper heat of humiliation settling into his chest. He thought of every story he'd ever read about a stop like this one ending wrong, and he made himself breathe, slow and even, the way you breathe through pain you cannot stop. Officer, he tried one more time, quieter now, almost pleading. If you'd just call my son, he's reachable even on deployment. There's a number the Navy can patch through. You mention your son one more time, Calloway said, leaning close enough that Walter could smell the burnt coffee on his breath. And I'm adding obstruction to whatever else we find. Find for what? Walter asked. There's nothing to find. We'll see. Calloway unclipped his handcuffs. Hands behind your back. No, Odessa lurched forward, only for Tibbets to catch her arm. He's got a bad hip. You'll hurt him. Ma'am, stand down. The cuffs clicked shut, biting into wrists that had spent 4 decades gripping a steering wheel, a hammer, a Bible, his wife's hand at every funeral and wedding their long life together had required. Walter bowed his head against the hot hood and prayed, silently, for the patience not to make this worse. That was when the engine note changed the air. It wasn't the sedan hum of suburban traffic. It was a deep, rolling growl, a heavy diesel pulling hard, and a dark green Chevrolet Silverado HD came down the access road faster than anyone driving sensibly would, slowing hard. Swerving into the gravel shoulder 15 yards back. Calloway looked up, annoyed. Tibbets, go tell whoever that is to keep moving. This is an active stop. But the driver didn't wait. The door swung open and a man stepped down, 6'3", built with the kind of density that came from years of physical discipline rather than a gym membership. wearing a plain grey navy PT shirt, cargo pants, boots still laced tight from a flight he'd clearly come straight from. His head was shaved close, his jaw set, and he didn't run. He walked with the unhurried, terrible purpose of a man who had already decided exactly what was about to happen. "Sir, get back in your vehicle," Tibbets called, stepping into his path. "This is an active scene." The man didn't so much as glance at him. His eyes were locked on his father, bent and cuffed over the hood of the truck he himself had bought 2 months earlier as a gift. "Stop right there," Calloway barked, hand drifting to his holster, "or you're joining them." The man stopped 5 feet away. He reached slowly into his back pocket. Tibbets's hand snapped to his weapon. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" What came out was not a gun. It was a leather case, and inside it, a Department of Defense identification card and a set of orders still crisp from printing. "Commander Theodore Greaves," the man said, voice deep, level, and absolutely without warmth. "United States Navy. And that's my father you've got bent over my truck." He took a single step closer, close enough that Calloway had to tilt his head to keep eye contact. "Take the cuffs off him. Now." The silence that followed had weight to it. Far off, the minivan idled, still filming. Somewhere a dog barked. Calloway looked at the ID. He looked at the truck. He looked at the old man bent over the hood, sweat darkening the collar of his Sunday shirt. The trouble had only just begun. Calloway stared at the laminated card a beat too long before tossing it back at Theo's chest, where it bounced off and landed in the gravel. "Anybody can print one of those. Doesn't prove a thing." Theo didn't blink, didn't bend to retrieve it. "Pick it up. Excuse me. That's federal property," Theo said, voice dropping into something colder. "You just discarded a DoD identification card belonging to an active duty officer. Pick it up." Tibbets, sweating through his uniform now, looked between the two men. "Brent, maybe we just run the name. If he's really—" "Shut up, Tibbets." Calloway's jaw tightened. "He's obstructing. Aggressive posture. I feel threatened." Tibbets hesitated. "He's just standing there, man. I feel threatened," Calloway said louder, as if volume made it true, and his hand found his taser. "Theo baby, please," Odessa's voice cracked from across the hood. "Just do what he says." A muscle jumped in Theo's jaw, but he raised both hands slowly, palms open. "He did not kneel. I'm checking on my father. He's 71. He's had 2 hip surgeries. If you leave him bent like that much longer, he's going to fall. And if he falls and gets hurt, I promise you, the consequences for you personally will outlast your career." "That a threat? That's a fact," Theo said, and turned his back on the taser entirely, a calculated, deliberate insult, to crouch by his father instead. "Dad, look at me." Walter's eyes were wet, his breathing shallow. I told him about you. I know, Dad." Theo's gaze fell to the cuffs, ratcheted tight enough to leave the skin already swelling pink beneath the metal. Something hot and dangerous moved behind his eyes, and he forced it down through sheer discipline, the same discipline that had carried him through 2 deployments and a command tour. "Assess, adapt, overcome." "Officer," Theo said, not turning, addressing Tibbets instead. "You have a duty to intervene when your partner is using excessive force on a compliant elderly subject. That's not me telling you. That's the law." Tibbets's hand hovered near the cuff key. Calloway's face went a deep, dangerous red. "Don't you touch those cuffs." He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch Unit 6. I need backup on Magnolia Crest, mile marker 2. Multiple non-compliant subjects. 1 large male claiming military credentials. Situation escalating. Copy, Unit 6. Units en route." Theo turned back to Calloway, calm as still water, which was somehow worse than rage. "You stopped an elderly couple because they didn't match your idea of who's allowed to drive a nice truck. You never ran the plates first. You ran your mouth first. And now you're in too deep to admit it, so you're doubling down." Calloway's hand left the taser for his baton instead. He liked this part. This was where men like him thrived, in the chaos he could justify after the fact. "You're under arrest. Obstruction, interference with an investigation." "Investigation of what?" Theo asked. "Where's the crime?" "I smell marijuana," Calloway said, pointing his baton at the truck cab, and the lie slid out smooth as oil. It was the oldest trick in a dirty cop's book, the magic words that turned a hunch into probable cause. In a truck driven by a church deacon and his wife who thinks 2 cups of coffee is reckless living, Theo said, flatly. "I smell it strong," Calloway insisted. "Tibbets, you smell it too, right?" Tibbets looked at the spotless cab, at Odessa clutching her purse like a shield, at Walter's pressed shirt, and something in his face crumbled. I don't really, right?" Calloway snapped. Tibbets muttered, looking at his boots. I smell it. There it is, Calloway said, triumphant. Probable cause. We searched the truck. And since you're claiming you own it, Commander, you're part of this too. Turn around. Theo didn't move. Instead, he tapped the heavy tactical watch on his wrist. You should know, Officer Calloway, that since I parked, my truck's dash camera has been recording continuous audio and video, cloud synced in real time. My mother also has 911 on an open line right now. County Dispatch is recording every word you say. And this truck has perimeter cameras that activate automatically the moment law enforcement initiates a stop. I had them installed myself for exactly this reason. Calloway's eyes cut to the truck's grille and side mirrors, where small dark lenses caught the light. You're bluffing, am I? Theo stepped forward. Go ahead. Search it. Find the drugs that don't exist. But understand, the second you cuff me, you trigger a federal inquiry that goes straight over your sergeant's head. Calloway hesitated, calculating, his pride wrestling his instincts. Pride won. Cuff him, Tibbets. 2 more cruisers arrived in a chorus of sirens, blocking the shoulder in a chaotic fan of red and blue. Theo let the rookie cuff him without resistance, his eyes fixed on the dashcam lens the entire time, making sure his face, and the injustice, was unmistakably recorded. Too tight? Tibbets asked quietly, almost apologetic. It's fine, Theo said. Just do your job, son. From the lead cruiser stepped Sergeant Earl Buford, a heavy-set man in his 50s with 30 years on the force and a reputation for protecting his own, even when his own were wrong. He surveyed the scene. The elderly man slumped over the hood, the weeping woman by the guardrail, the cuffed giant standing stone still in a Navy PT shirt, and his frown deepened. What in God's name is this circus, Calloway? Calloway hurried over, talking fast and low. Sarge, we hit a truck matching a theft pattern out of 3 counties. Driver got combative, then this one comes flying up out of nowhere, jumps out, starts mouthing off, flashing some ID. I think we've got a drug situation. I smelled weed in the cab. Buford's eyes drifted to Walter, still bent over the hood. Get the old man off the hood. Stand him up. But Sarge, he was. I said stand him up. Buford had survived 30 years on this job by knowing exactly which messes turned into lawsuits. Calloway hauled Walter upright. The old man's back popped audibly, and he let out a low groan that made Odessa whimper. Buford turned to Theo. You the son? Commander Theodore Greaves, United States Navy. I'm being unlawfully detained, and my father is being abused. He needs medical attention. Buford's eyes narrowed, unconvinced but cautious. Calloway says he smelled weed, gives us the right to search. Car's clean, you walk. If not, it's clean, Theo said. But he's going to plant something. I watched him reach into his ankle holster pocket before he ever opened that door. That's a hell of an accusation against a sworn officer. It's an observation, Theo said. Search it, Sergeant. Let's find out. Calloway pulled on a pair of black gloves with visible relish and went to work, tossing Odessa's Bible onto the floor mat, dumping the glove box, rifling under the seats. Theo watched, muscles coiled, recognizing the rhythm of a man stalling for the right moment to discover something that was never there to begin with. 5 minutes in, Calloway popped the tailgate's hidden underbed storage and crouched, then stood, holding a small snub-nosed revolver, rust pitting the barrel, the serial number filed to a smear of scratches. Bingo, he announced. Found it tucked under the bed liner. Filed serial number. That's a felony, folks. Looks like everybody's going downtown. That's not ours, Odessa cried. We've never owned a gun in our lives. We don't even. Buford walked over, studying the weapon with a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The truck's interior was immaculate. Not a speck of dust, not a fingerprint smudge anywhere. Under the bed liner, you said? Wedged deep against the frame, Calloway said, a touch too quickly. Theo closed his eyes for a moment, breathing once, slow and controlled. When he opened them, they were ice. Officer Calloway, you made a mistake. The only mistake was you driving up. Calloway sneered. Read him his rights, Tibbets. The mistake, Theo continued, voice carrying clearly toward the dashcam, is that you don't know this truck. This is a 2026 King Ranch with the factory underbed storage system. A sealed composite tray with a single magnetic latch, installed flush, no gap large enough to wedge anything behind it. There's no deep against the frame. There's a tray, and either that gun was sitting directly on top in plain sight, which means you'd have seen it the second you opened it, not after 5 minutes of digging, or it didn't come out of that tray at all. Silence dropped over the shoulder of the road like a held breath. Buford crossed to the tailgate and opened the tray himself. Flat composite floor, no crevice, no hiding place. He looked at the gun in Calloway's gloved hand, then at the dust-free tray, then at Calloway's face, which had gone the color of old paper. Calloway, where exactly did this come from? It was wedged, Sarge. I had to pry it. You said under the bed liner, Theo reminded him, calm as a held note. That's what I meant, the liner. Stop listening to him. He's a suspect, Sarge. Sarge. Tibbets's voice was barely above a whisper. I saw him take a rag out of his vest pocket before he reached under there. Calloway spun on him with such venom that Tibbets flinched backward. You lying little. Hey! Buford stepped between them, hand falling instinctively to his own sidearm. Everybody stand down right now. He planted it, Theo said, his voice finally rising to full command volume, the kind that had once moved 100 sailors across a flight deck in a storm. You have a dirty cop trying to frame a Navy family on the side of a public road, and you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you're a witness or an accomplice. Sergeant, shut your mouth, Calloway snapped, and in his panic he leveled the revolver, the planted evidence itself, loosely in Theo's direction. I said shut up! Put it down, Calloway, Buford roared, drawing his own weapon, training it on his own officer for the first time in 30 years of wearing the badge. What in God's name are you doing? Calloway was unraveling in real time, the bravado sliding off him like wet paint. I'm not going down for these people. I run this beat. Not anymore, said a new voice. A black government SUV had eased to a stop behind the cruisers, silent as a held breath. 2 men in dark windbreakers stepped out first, and then a woman in Navy service dress, gold oak leaves gleaming on her collar. Theo's shoulders eased, just slightly, for the first time since he'd stepped out of his truck. About time. The woman walked forward without hesitation. Sergeant, I'm Lieutenant Commander Patrice Renwick, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I've been on an open line through Commander Greaves's earpiece for the last 18 minutes. She turned her gaze, sharp and unhurried, toward Calloway. I heard the racial commentary. I heard the refusal to verify identification. I heard the manufactured probable cause. And I heard the planting of evidence in real time. She stopped a few feet from Calloway, who was now staring at the gun in his own hand, as though it had grown there by accident. I'd suggest you arrest this officer immediately, Renwick said, glancing toward the state troopers just now arriving in the distance. Before the FBI gets here, which, by my count, is about 5 minutes away. The August sun beat down on a street that had, in the span of 20 minutes, become a courtroom of consequence. Calloway's hand trembled around the revolver. He looked at Theo, unmoving, immovable, a man built entirely out of discipline. He looked at Buford, gun still raised. He looked at the JAG officer, whose presence alone meant the federal government already knew his name. The gun slipped from his fingers and clattered against the asphalt. Hands on your head, Buford barked, rushing forward, slamming Calloway face first against the very truck he'd tried to tear apart. Brent Calloway, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, assault, and deprivation of rights under color of law. He yanked Calloway's own cuffs from his belt and ratcheted them tight, the same cuffs that had bitten into countless wrists over the years, finally closing around his own. You're making a mistake, Calloway hissed, cheek pressed to hot metal. I've got things on people, the mayor. I can fix this. Shut up, Calloway, Buford said, low and tired. You didn't just break the law, you got caught on federal cameras doing it. You're radioactive. While Calloway was secured, Theo moved straight to his father, ignoring everything else. Tibbets, Keys, the rookie, pale and shaking, fumbled the cuff key free and handed it over without a word. Theo unlocked his father's wrist gently, revealing raw, bruised welts already darkening beneath the skin. Walter exhaled, long and shuddering, and sagged against his son's chest. I'm okay, Walter murmured. I'm okay, son. You're not, Theo said quietly, eyes scanning the damage. He looked up at Buford. I want paramedics here. Now, and a chair. Get the man a chair, Buford snapped at Tibbets, who scrambled for the folding seat in his cruiser's trunk. Odessa rushed to her husband, sobbing, openly now, the dam finally breaking after years of practiced calm. They treated us like criminals, Theo. Like we were nothing. I know, Mama. Theo held her, his eyes on the cruiser where Calloway sat handcuffed in the back seat, the badge that had made him feel untouchable, now worth exactly nothing. But look, he's the one in the cage now. The wail of new sirens rose over the trees. Not local this time. 2 black SUVs swept past the stopped traffic, boxing in the patrol cars. Federal agents in windbreakers stepped out, led by a sharp-eyed woman named Special Agent Renata Cole, whose reputation for dismantling small-town corruption rings preceded her into every room she entered. She crossed straight to Lieutenant Commander Renwick, exchanging a single professional nod that said everything that needed saying. Then she turned to Buford. FBI. "We're taking jurisdiction. On what grounds?" Buford asked, though he looked almost relieved to hand the wreckage over. "Civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and an assault on the family of a federal asset," Cole said, ticking the items off without inflection. "And because Commander Greaves holds an active clearance, this is now a matter of federal interest. We have reason to believe this department has a pattern of targeting military families and minority motorists for asset seizure." She walked to the cruiser, tapped on the glass. Calloway looked up, eyes hollow. "Officer Calloway," she said, with the calm of a woman who had said this exact sentence 100 times before. "You have the right to remain silent. I genuinely hope you don't, because the hole you've dug is very deep, and the only rope I'm offering is information about who taught you to carry a throwdown gun." Within a week, what had happened on Magnolia Crest Lane had stopped being a local story. The dashcam footage, leaked by someone inside the JAG office who couldn't stomach sitting on it, hit social media with the county's name blurred but the truth fully intact. 8 million views in 4 days. The hashtag Commander Greaves trended nationwide. The image of a decorated naval officer standing unflinching between a corrupt cop and his handcuffed father became, almost overnight, a symbol that outlasted the news cycle. Inside the department, the dominoes began to fall fast. Tibbets, the rookie, sat across from Agent Cole in an interrogation room 2 days later, a glass of water trembling in his hands. "I didn't want to do it," he said. "Calloway trained me. Told me if you can't find a crime, you make one. Because the department needs the revenue." "Revenue," Cole repeated. "Explain. He targets nice cars. Out-of-toners, minorities mostly. Sometimes kids who look like they've got money, but no connections back home. He plants something, seizes the vehicle under asset forfeiture. The cars don't go to city auction." Tibbets's voice cracked. "There's an impound lot. Calloway's cousin runs it. They strip them or ship them out of state with washed titles. The chief gets a cut. A judge gets a cut." It wasn't one bad cop. It was a machine, and the Greaves family had simply been its latest, costliest mistake. At the hospital, Walter lay propped up in a bed surrounded by more flowers than the room could hold, the overflow lining the hallway outside. Doctors confirmed soft tissue damage in both wrists and a re-aggravated hip injury from being forced into that bent position over the hood. Odessa sat beside him, holding his hand, her thumb tracing slow circles over his knuckles, the way she had every difficult night of their marriage. Theo arrived that evening, still in the same grey PT shirt, exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes but something steadier underneath it. "How you feeling, Pop?" "Like I went 12 rounds and lost," Walter said, managing a thin smile. "Doctor says I'll be back on my feet in a few weeks." "I'm sorry," Theo said, voice rough. "I bought that truck to make your life easier. Instead it put a target on you." "Don't you dare say that," Odessa cut in sharply, standing. "You didn't put hatred in that man's heart. He brought that all on his own. You came home and you saved us, Theo." Theo's jaw tightened. "I'm not finished. They're not just getting fired." He pulled out his phone. "I spoke with the Commodore an hour ago. He's furious. He's already arranging counsel for the civil suit, pro bono, through Navy legal assistance, and he's issuing a public statement about what happened to this family." Walter's eyes widened. "The Commodore himself?" "You don't go after a sailor's family and expect it to stay quiet," Theo said grimly. "And there's more." The FBI searched Calloway's locker, found a ledger, names, dates, dollar amounts going back 6 years. Every person he ever framed. Back at the station, in a holding cell, Calloway sat in an orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too small, stripped of every shred of the authority he'd worn like armor for a decade. He was allowed 1 phone call, and he used it on Judge Harlan Voss, the man who'd signed off on most of his warrants and quietly taken a percentage of every seized vehicle that crossed the county line. "Judge, it's Brent," he whispered into the receiver. "You gotta get me out. Set bail. I'll figure the rest out." A long silence. "Who is this?" the voice on the other end said, cold as a closed door. "It's Brent. Come on, Harlan. I don't know any Brent. And if you call this number again, I'll have you charged with harassment." The line went dead. Calloway stared at the receiver, the dial tone humming like an insult. The men who had built his power around him had vanished the instant that power became a liability. He was alone with what he'd done, and the karma was only beginning to arrive. 3 months later, autumn had settled over the county courthouse, the air finally losing its August thickness. The trial of the state versus Brent Calloway had become the kind of national story that filled cable segments for a week straight. Reporters lined the back wall. In the front row sat Walter, in a wheelchair now for the long sessions, his hip still healing. Odessa sat beside him, spine straight, hand locked in his. On the other side sat Theo, in dress blues, a silent, undeniable presence that the jury could not look away from. Calloway, at the defense table, had lost considerable weight and all of his swagger. His lawyer, paid for as long as the police union could stomach the optics, tried repeatedly for a plea deal. The new district attorney, a relentless woman named Adina Vos Marchetti, no relation to the disgraced judge, a coincidence the papers loved pointing out, wasn't interested in deals. "The defense will tell you this was a hunch that went wrong," she told the jury. "We will show you it was a system, built and maintained for profit, with this family as its latest casualty." The star witness wasn't Theo. It wasn't even Walter. It was Tibbets, who took the stand looking terrified and resolved in equal measure, and methodically dismantled the wall of silence brick by brick. There was a leaderboard, he testified, voice shaking but clear. In his locker, points for stops, more points for luxury vehicles, more for seizures. He called it the count. Next to the name Greaves the night of the arrest, he'd written jackpot or bust. The defense objected, called it hearsay, no physical evidence. The prosecution smiled and produced exactly that, recovered deleted photos from Calloway's own phone, the leaderboard glowing on the courtroom screen for every juror to see. Then came the parade nobody expected, a string of Calloway's past victims, called not by the defense, but by the prosecution. A young man whose scholarship fund had been seized during a stop 2 years earlier. A single mother whose car was impounded over a prescription bottle. Calloway swore was contraband, costing her the job she needed it to commute to. A mechanic forced to falsify inspection records on stolen vehicles or lose his shop's license. 18 of them, in total. 18 lives quietly wrecked long before Walter and Odessa Greaves had ever pulled out of their driveway that Sunday afternoon. The final blow came from Calloway's own cruiser audio, recorded minutes before the stop, played for a courtroom gone utterly silent. His voice, tinny and careless, filled the room. "Look at them. Probably can't even work the AC in that thing. We take the truck, sit them in holding for 48 hours. By the time they get a lawyer, the truck's already in 3 pieces, in another state. Who's gonna believe 2 nobodies over a badge?" Walter closed his eyes. A single tear slid down through the lines of his face, not grief this time. Vindication. The jury took less than 2 hours. The foreman didn't look at Calloway when he read the verdict. He looked at Walter. "We find the defendant, Brent Calloway, guilty on all counts." The judge, an unflinching man named Harold Pemberton, looked down at Calloway over his glasses. "You swore an oath to protect this community. Instead, you treated it as a hunting ground. You stripped a family, and many others before them, of dignity, safety, and trust in the very people meant to guard it." He sentenced Calloway to 22 years, with restitution to every documented victim, totaling $3.5 million, all current and future assets seized. The gavel cracked like a verdict from somewhere higher than the bench. Calloway looked back into the gallery for someone, anyone in his corner. There was no one. Only the people he had wronged, sitting tall, finally seen. Spring came easy to the county the following year. The department had been gutted and was being rebuilt from the studs up. Mandatory body cameras, a civilian oversight board, a new chief brought in from outside who answered to nobody's old favors. Judge Voss had been disbarred and was facing his own charges. But the real story, that spring was happening in the Greaves' backyard, where smoke curled up from a grill loaded with ribs, and the whole street had turned out. Not out of obligation, but out of something closer to celebration. Walter sat on the porch, cane resting against his chair, watching grandchildren chase each other across the lawn, no wheelchair in sight anymore. A new truck pulled into the driveway, not the King Ranch, which had become evidence, and then a kind of museum piece nobody wanted back, but a fresh model, a gift from the manufacturer, along with a public apology and a sizable donation to a veterans' legal fund. Theo stepped out, jeans and a faded shirt, no uniform today. He climbed the porch steps and handed his father a glass of sweet tea. "Good turnout, Pop. Whole street's here," Walter said. Even a couple of the new officers stopped by. They know better than not to, Theo said, smiling for what felt like the first time in months. Odessa came out wiping her hands on her apron, 10 years lighter than she'd looked at the trial. Theo, that reporter's back, wants to know if you're running for county commissioner. He laughed, shaking his head. No, Mama, I've got another deployment coming, but I did think about what to do with the settlement. The civil suit against the city had settled for just over $7 million, a number none of them had asked for, and none of them quite knew what to do with. We don't need all that, Walter said, the way he always did. I've got my pension. I've got my home. I know. Theo gestured across the street to the empty lot that had sat overgrown and forgotten for a decade, which is why I bought that land this morning. He unrolled a set of blueprints on the porch table. The Walter and Odessa Greaves Community Justice Center, free legal aid for anyone in the county who couldn't afford it, staffed by JAG reservists on rotation and civil rights attorneys, with a standing scholarship fund for the families Calloway and men like him had quietly ruined. Odessa pressed a hand to her mouth, tears finally falling, the good kind. You're a good man, Theodore Greaves, she said. Had good teachers, he answered, looking at his father. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street as the sun dipped low and gold over the lawn. The officer inside didn't slow to stare, didn't glare. He raised a hand in something like respect and kept moving. Walter lifted his glass in return. We won, son, he said quietly. No, Dad, Theo said, looking out at the laughing crowd, the new truck in the driveway, the blueprints catching the last of the light. We didn't just win. We changed what this street looks like for everybody who comes after us. The sun went down, slow and easy, over a house that love had built and justice had finally protected, and somewhere out on Magnolia Crest Lane, a quiet ending was already becoming somebody else's reason to believe that the truth eventually always finds its way home.